What's up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we're going to be breaking down the 2020 fantasy outlook for Joe Mixon, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, giving you guys what you can expect from him for fantasy in 2020. But hey, before we get started, if you guys are looking for more videos like this one, hit that like and subscribe button. We're going to be going over every fantasy relevant player heading into the 2020 season, giving you guys an in-depth analysis over what you can expect from them, and we'll have a full rankings posted up on our website already, so check that out at fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. But without any further ado, let's get started. All right, so looking at 2019, before we get into his stats, I want to preface again how poorly of a situation Joe Mixon was placed in last year. Coming into the season, Zach Taylor comes into an offense that they lose their first round tackle in Jonah Williams. Their offensive line is complete garbage. Outside of that, Andy Dalton was very erratic, wasn't able to do much, and their defense was also terrible. Just complete terrible season, going 2-14, averaging being down on average over 7 points. So constantly playing from behind and playing for a team with one of the worst run blocking offensive lines. There really was no positive note for Joe Mixon. So when you consider the amount of carries he had, the rushing yards, it's easy to say on the surface that it looks like, well, he didn't have a very efficient season. But when you consider all that was working against him, the fact that he was still able to squeak out and finish with a 13th best 225 fantasy points is actually pretty absurd. And we're really excited for what he could potentially do this year, because with Joe Burrow coming in, if Joe Burrow can just lift the ship a little bit, just improve that offense a little bit, Jonah Williams can come in and improve that offensive line. It doesn't take much for them to turn the dial up just a few notches and turn Joe Mixon into an absolute stud heading into 2020. They didn't do anything to address the running back situation with guys of note. Giovanni Bernard is still the running back 2, and he's not getting any more efficient. He's seen a drop in his efficiency over the last couple years. So when you look at Joe Mixon last year, 1,137 rushing yards on 278 carries, only 35 receptions and 287 receiving yards, but we could see that go up as well, especially when you consider that Giovanni Bernard is again not playing well with the touches that he has been giving. I'm sure they're going to continue to use him. I'm not expecting him to go away altogether, but Joe Mixon is a true workhorse and will get workhorse type carries and touches in this backfield. And if Joe Burrow ends up throwing the ball to the running backs a little bit more, kind of like he did with Clyde Edwards-Helaire in college, we could definitely see an uptick in receptions as well. And also, 8 total touchdowns is not anything to just brush under the rug. That was very good considering the circumstances that Joe Mixon played under. And when you consider he got 8 touchdowns and Leonard Fournette, playing in a better situation, was only able to get 3, Joe Mixon had a really good season when you consider all that was working against him. So let's look at the game logs. And for those of you that had Joe Mixon, you remember the just absolutely horrid, terrible beginning to the season. Starts the season out with 3.7 and 5.7 fantasy points in his first 2 weeks. Has a good game against Buffalo, and then has 4 more games in a row where you probably weren't happy that you started him, especially considering you probably had to spend a late first, early second round pick. And I'm pretty sure that the reason why there's still a remnant of people that don't believe in Joe Mixon is because of that 7-game stretch right there. I remember seeing people all over the place that were asking, do I drop Joe Mixon? Like, I can't trust starting him. Is there even any value in rostering him anymore? And anyone that dropped him at that point would have made a massive mistake. From week 8 onwards, Joe Mixon was the 6th best fantasy running back across that span, averaging the 8th most points per game. And again, like, nothing changed about the situation. He was still playing with Andy Dalton and Ryan Finley. He was still playing behind one of the league's worst run-blocking offensive lines, and he was still playing on a team that was losing virtually every game that they played. He has 2 weeks where he finishes as a top 6 running back against Cleveland in week 14 and 17, multiple running back 1 weeks, had a poor game against Miami where he got sick the day of, but still playing against New England in week 15. After that game, Bill Belichick had come out and said that Joe Mixon is the best running back in the NFL. And while there's plenty of things I don't like about Bill Belichick, I still trust his intuition as a football coach, as someone that knows football, and for him to come out and say that about another player speaks volumes to me. So Joe Mixon, incredibly talented, playing in a terrible situation. But let's look at some of the other stats that really just speak to how good Joe Mixon actually was last year. So he had number 6 opportunity share. When we talk about running backs in fantasy, you always want running backs that are getting tons of volume. Volume is key, and he had the 6th most volume of any running back in the entire NFL. So if the efficiency goes up just a little bit from this offense, you can expect that that opportunity share will turn exponentially into more fantasy points just based on that notch up in efficiency. Joe Mixon had 48 red zone touches, and that ranked number 7 in the NFL, and 12 goal line carries, which is number 3. Now, again, playing behind a bad offensive line, if Jonah Williams can make this offensive line a bit better for run blocking, you could expect some touchdown regression in a positive direction for Joe Mixon headed into 2020. And he ranked number 1 in evaded tackles with 103 and number 4 in juke rate at 32.9%. So this guy was doing work out there, even behind basically going to war every single week. He had 576 yards created, which was second best in the NFL, and 1.84 yards created per touch, which is 15th. So when you consider all the efficiency metrics that we just went over, like Joe Mixon had a really solid season, even though it didn't turn into massive fantasy production because of all the things that were working against him. If even just a couple things go right for him in 2020, he could very, very easily jump into that elite tier of running backs. And when we look at the way that we have him projected right now, we're expecting a modest efficiency increase. So we have him jumping up to 1,200 rushing yards. We have him getting a few more targets, which brings him up to 44 receptions and 355 receiving yards. We give him a positive touchdown regression, taking him up to 11 total touchdowns. That would put him at about 270 fantasy points, which would put him square in that top 6, top 7 running back conversation. Definitely someone that's worth going in the middle of the first round. But he also has incredible upside when you consider what happens if Giovanni Bernard gets hurt. What happens if Giovanni Bernard is just terrible and Zach Taylor's like, screw it, we're just going to keep Joe Mixon out there all the time like we do with Christian McCaffrey? What if he has 50, 60, or 70 receptions? What if the offensive line is a lot better with Jonah Williams there, and he ends up with 1,400 rushing yards or 14 total touchdowns? You can tell a story where he could very quickly become just as efficient as a guy like Zeke or Dalvin Cook. And if you miss out on those first tier running backs, Joe Mixon should be at the top of your list of guys that you are considering in the first round for all the reasons that we laid out. I love Joe Mixon this year. I am very high on him, and I'm definitely going to be looking to acquire him as much as I possibly can. I think he is primed for a breakout year, and if Joe Burrow is even half of what he was in college, that's going to help this team tremendously, and I'm really excited for the prospects of what that means for Joe Mixon. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're looking for more videos like this one, hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you guys in the next video.